Dear friends, we've talked about the genocides and the religious massacres and all of the diasporas of religion into the South Pacific, into Australasia, all of the issues about the continents like Russia and China never having a life. We've not focused much on Africa apart from the French crimes in French colonial Africa and those northern regions before the Yanks and Kissinger intimidated them out of those places, with a lot of help from the Brits. What I want to talk about today is the total suppression of sub-Saharan Africa for all of its existence. The explorers, the military men, the politicians that are involved in that, and I'm going to show you that all of it is a massive tragedy, both ecologically, environmentally, and in the capacity to sustain the cultures and the civilized behaviours that they had when the rainforests were in existence. They're all gone, almost all gone, apart from those that are privately owned exclusively by Prince Philip, the royal family and the World Wildlife Fund. But no longer is Camilla's brother in the ownership team, because God catches up with you eventually, as I'm going to show you in the opening video clips. Right then, I hope you don't find any of this offensive, because thousands of people die in the conflicts that are totally engineered to create the power base for the G8 countries all of the time, and the really powerful English speaking races. Okay, so let's see the power of God. But the capacity of these bastards who steal from the whole world to laugh at everything they do. Corporal Jones comes into the story later on, but this is the Corporal Jones in the jokes about World War II. Everyone in the cast list is an evil profiteer, a president who takes his country to war, or just a man on the street that's prepared to sell chattels and second-hand goods from dead colleagues. It is totally tragic. But the upside is in the second video. Okay, so this is Corporal Jones from the Dad's Army team and his rambling stories. And I'm going to come and pick up the camera as this begins to play.
Always enjoyed a man wearing full dress uniform when anyone was on a fitter. This red coat's been worn by the British Army for over 200 years, sir. Trouble is the red showed up a bit, and a lot of men got shot, sir, and they didn't like that, sir. One hot day in India, when the air was all furtive and was all dusty, some of the men, they put a lot of dust all over them, and they found they didn't get shot, and they liked that. And that's where the old expression comes from. Khaki, that's an old Urdu expression for dust. Urdu for dust, that is, sir. And then there's another expression, not so dusty. Yeah, all right. We're at sea. We're at sea! I wonder how it works. No idea. Jones, have you any idea how to handle these things? No, sir, we never had a firing piece like that in the Sudan. We used to have a thing called a Gatling gun, sir. That was invented by an American dentist, a Mr. Gatling, sir. And we used to use it in the Sudan. We used to form a square and have the Gatling gun in the middle. And when them pussy budgies come curling towards you with their blood cries, we used to duck down the last minute. Up come the gun. But you had to duck down quick, otherwise you got the top of your helmet shot off. That hence the expression, sir. Get your head down. Yes, all right, cool.
So everything for them is a joke, and for world leaders it's much more hilarious. That's Hillary Clinton. Right then. So I think the next one is a revenge attack, but my mate's in the sky. Yeah. It's about division and how people are prepared to present false religions that the same teams write about, and they tell you that they are a menace to the world. That's exactly what happened in Khartoum. The mad Mahdi that fought Butcher Jones and those British armies. The British armies were not British armies at all. They were conscripts from Egypt and from all over the world, including India, fighting because Egypt was the owner of Khartoum and Britain was the owner of Egypt, so the Brits don't come in until they do the second genocide in that region. It's kind of complicated, but I think you'll get the gist of it. And what they did was to take the world to war again using the Islamic fez. And God does not think that's at all funny, which is why he needs to keep an eye on Michael Moore. I don't know whether or not he's still an MP. I'm not interested in the corrupted British politics at the moment. I will catch up soon with the new thieves.
And these rings will slowly come apart in front of your very eyes. Just a little twist like that.
There's the fez.
And it slowly come apart.
And Khartoum, if you're not aware, is just across the Gulf from the Garden of Eden. Yeah? Ethiopia, several genocides there. Khartoum is in the Sudan, right next door, and the river that runs through it is called the Pishon, the Kush, or the Nile, or various derivatives of it. The story is really sickening, but some of it makes you really God-fearing. This man found it out too late.
Oh, we did it. Thank you.
It's Eva Braun's little blue dress. And this is the magic. Yep. The magic that convinced the world that the White Lady appeared and all of those philosophical stories I told you yesterday. This man is having his last few breaths, and that's the carbon consumption joke that is all the way into deforested Africa. There are no forests left. And the Queen is watching this, but her family failed to learn the lesson. So those were his last breaths, and I'm now going to close that down so we can have a look at, let's go into it first. I'll close it down later on. If we need to watch anything else that might enlighten you, then we can. I'm going to take you through it quickly because there are several sections, and I want to summarize what the next two videos will be about. So that's the massive dam at the place which is called Aswan on the River Nile. The River Nile has 6 or 7 massive cataracts, which are places which are fall zones. Yeah, and we've talked about fault lines and fall zones and how they get shifted around whenever there is a massive act of God, like the one that occurred in the Palladium. It was much less melodramatic than creating cataracts out of a gently flowing river. But when God makes those decisions, like the decisions as to whether or not the rain falls on the fertile land adjacent to the river that the gods used to control, yeah, it's all a massive issue. So there's a bit of the video will be on that issue. Some of the video will be on the land and the tribes that were replaced. Have you heard of nubile tribes? Yeah, it's all a joke about sexuality, genocide, land grabs, and all of the money streams that ensue. So the place that the dam was built to flood was called Nubia. Okay, and then you've got the Nile, and that leads to a whole series of jokes in the Piso stable, and I'll explain that as we get to the tab, as we go through the tabs one by one. Okay, and we've got a search, a perpetual search for a long period of human history for the source of the Nile, and it's really enlightening to see the people that engage in that, and the things that occur, even to place names. When we were in New Zealand, there was a massive earthquake in New Zealand, I think in the early 20th century, and it was a gorge called the Buller Gorge. Have you heard me mention the Buller name before? The name Murchison is also an explorer in the Upper Nile, and what you get from these geological experts is everywhere they go and their names are associated with, they get shaken up by God. Yeah, and the Murchison earthquake only killed 19 people, but it brought a lot of people to their senses. Okay, the Murchison is a geological fellow of the Royal Society, a knight of our realm, and you saw the crown and the medals. Yeah, all of them are on the take, and all of them, if you pretend that you understand the whole of the things that God's charged with in our universe, like the physics projects, yeah, and the insight that that guy in the wheelchair has into the nature of the gods' universe. That's why he's in the wheelchair, and that's why he's got motor neuron disease, like Just van der Westhuizen. His, I'm led to believe, are charitable and bedroom crimes against the fair sex. Right, the next one is a tab called Khartoum, which is on the Corporal Jones issues, and it's still during the period like the Zulu Wars in South Africa, when the British armies wore the red jackets. Yeah, they were blood red, and very few people come home from Khartoum on either side. And I've told you already that they pulled in people from India in the Asian continent to take the revenge attack in there under Lord Kitchener's thrall, and the little tiffs that they have and the money stream that they create out of the Houses of Parliament and Gladstone's government in Britain are shocking, because they're not index linked, and they're not linked at all to inflation. Even in those days, 120 years ago, they're massive sums of money. And everybody in the first conflict is from other countries fighting on behalf of Britain because it owns its empire. Isn't that sad? And then when you look at Google Maps to find the battle zones, and you look for the boundaries and where the river Pishon and Kush and the Nile actually is, and where the confluence is, that is the town of Khartoum, you see that there are very few afforested areas. They all look just like my beautiful borders region. All the land's been drained, all the lakes have been dried, everything is now there to grow tobacco. And sadly, the coffee product, which I enjoy so much, used to be part of the jungle's output, but the jungle has gone, and they pretend that that is the locals' fault, which is why only the locals get culled in the gigantic conflict that ensued about the revolution that was led by the Mahdi in Khartoum. Okay, so there's the tab on the Buller Gorge in New Zealand, and if the New Zealanders are beginning to wake up to the stories I tell, they will see that the Christchurch quake was not an accident. It's related to the visit of the Trans-Pacific Trade Delegation who went to Japan when they had the tsunami. Yeah, and he's a fucking geologist, I've said in this little prescriptive introduction, and he lives in County Durham at Barnard Castle, where me and my disloyal wife went to these massive mansions. But my disloyal wife had other affairs to contend with that day, like all of the holidays she took alone. Once she was into our cooperative holiday fund for the family, it was emptied by the time she left me, but that is not nearly as serious as the genocides. Okay, it's the same team players though. Okay, so that's Babylonian castles and museums in the town of Barnard Castle, so I can get the local Yorkshire people and the Geordies all riled up about what their neighbours are doing to our world. Okay, and that's the name Murchison, Buller Gord, Murchison, New Zealand. And we went to Murchison in New Zealand, and I met a millionaire from Edinburgh who wanted to make me a team player with him. They do not understand what I'm all about. Yeah, 1929. And that's on the other side of the world, but the African reverence for Sir Murchison is extreme, and he's up there in the cataract region, and there's cataracts there because the evil is ever so old. And there's his particular family lifespan. And guess what? He lived in a home called Tara. That's the vast tracts of land joke in the film about the American Revolution, which was called Rhett Douglas, and it was called Gone with the Wind, and it was made in 1939 because they knew that the world that we live in was going to be gone with the wind, and that's the 39 steps joke. Aren't they amusing? And he's a greaseball too, like Fenimore Cooper. Sir Roderick Murchison, BT. Right then the Khartoum story. I'll show you that first, because it is particularly ruthless in a geopolitical context, like everything I told you about North America and the indigenous peoples. And there we've got the pictures of well, there are very few pictures, but that is the horrific statistics. 98% of the Ethiopian rainforest has gone in the last 50 years. As always, the locals get the blame, the guns, the Eritrean refugees, but Costa Coffee get to grow the fucking coffee beans with impunity from everything. That is 98% in only 50 years. Yeah, so I was making references to the Tarzan movie and the return of Tarzan from the jungles, yeah, in Southeast Asia. But what you've got here is the disappearance of the jungles, and there is no mention of the elite furnishing industry or the cedar church roofs that all of the false religions like to trade in. Yeah, it's absolutely ruthless. And all of you can find that out for yourself if you look up the regions on Google Maps. Okay? Right then, Butcher Jones's jokes. Now I'll keep this till the second half. I'm going to have to make two videos, but the Butcher Jones's jokes are not about Ethiopia, they're not about the Sudan, they're actually about the culling of the American Indians in Arizona, where Butcher Jones's park is. Yet they think they're ever so sophisticated that they can twist world history into overlapping jokes that no one could possibly understand. But it is really easy to see when you see the template they use. Yeah, it's really easy to see that it is a laugh about the killing of the world's innocents. Every one of these campaigns. This story makes me feel heroic. because it ties you into the Fugitive movie, the Theodore Roosevelt Dam. Can you see it? It looks like the place that was the joke about the safe haven for the elves in the Lord of the Rings movie, doesn't it? From the top of the mountain. Yeah, that's the Rivendell joke. Yeah, but that is exactly the same type of pump house that the Balfours have on the farm that I was born in, and that is the opening of Theodore Roosevelt's dam. And everything they do with the dams creates massive floods, because the gods are being dispossessed of their power to reward the good people and to punish the evil people, because the evil people think they are much cleverer than everybody else. They are much richer, but FDR eventually got polio, and the gods always get the last laugh. And you can see the sun creeping out again. Yeah, it's quite a beautiful day now, and it has been getting progressively warmer since I began to uncover everything in Khartoum. It's a bloody massacre, and it is ever so driven by corrupted politics. Yeah, the fact that they get other nations to die for their empire without even putting the finger on the trigger themselves is really, really ruthless. And if you opt out of being a mercenary, then you're the revolutionary or the anti-communist threat, and you get it in the neck much quicker than the other lot. But everybody on all sides is dead, and the politicians only get the 11 million trickle down, which was a massive amount of money in those days. The man called Gordon got £100,000 to run the war from the local location, and his name is, his initials are GG, which is why he's on the scene manipulating all of the political events, and the media in London do the rest. The media joke is also revealed when we get more deeply into each of the tabs. The Nasser stories and the executions are just like all of the stories that we've had since the New World Order took over the press. That's hundreds of years back. The release of news been manipulated by the yellow taxi companies and all of the European mail posting systems, and there's Nasser, died at 50, riddled with pathologies, with Mubarak waiting in the wings, and the Brits take the whole pichon, war after war after war, to end all wars. And the Khartoum conflict ended, and all of the people that went to safe houses, like the presidents on both sides and the leader of the revolutionary movement, they all got let out within 4 years of World War I. And Mubarak, who's been a tank commander for 30 years, has been the unelected president for 20 of those. He's in a safe house, and they are really posh and elite safe houses, and the Egyptians still get $1 million, maybe $2 million in USAID to suppress their people. Kebble. This takes us into more and more and more religious jokes. So you might have heard of Wilson, Betty and Kebble. Yeah, that is a series of Wilsons. Yeah, they're in the Dad's Army jokes too. The Kebble guy appears in the film about the dam and the healthcare frauds in the city of Chicago, where Indiana Jones with the cowboy hat plays the lead role. Yeah, there's a double agent for you. Can you see it? It's simple. You just scare the wits out of the people on the telly or in the news or in the election campaign like Michael Moore, and then you take everything from them and you put it into the havens where you have your stash. And if anybody gets in the way, Michael Moore, or Kev Moore if it's not him, can just deploy the Assassination Bureau in Glasgow that I talked about. Crawl. Right then. So, Wilson, Betty and Kebble. Kebble is actually a theologian at the University of fucking Oxford. And there's Kebble's College, no links at all to Egyptology, but sainted by the Church of England for his interests in sectarianism and links to Coleridge et al. In the inner circle of authors. Yeah, look it up for yourself, they will take it down, but if you're bored by my lengthy videos, then you can find a route into this on Wikipedia. All you need is a little bit of common sense and you can see exactly why he's smiling warmly. Okay, that's way back in 1863. Right then, and then we've got another one of the theologians in this team is called Pussy. Yeah, that is the scarf that they used to wear in the Beaverbrook papers as an icon for the business world. I forget what the pattern is called. Yeah, but that is the power base, and the Puss Parius jokes have been occurring since the Roman court began to defraud everybody with the Roman Jewish false religions and the biblical texts. And then we get the Wilson, Betty and Keppel thing. I'll show you this so it captures your attention, and you can maybe watch the next videos I make on this theme. So this is the joke that everybody makes, dancing around making the swastika sign. Kylie's guilty of that. Almost all of the New World Order bands, when they're singing about things like that, they jump and raise their feet off the ground. That is warding off the devilish political tactics that all of them are a part of. Okay, right then. So let's have a briefly look at this. It may not open very quickly.
Who's the most popular term we've ever shown on this program. Everywhere I go, people say, let's see.
And can you think of who Betty is? The Freemasons sing about them. Yeah, you can call me Betty. I will call you Betty, and you can call me Al. Yeah, all of the time it's a joke. Betty is Queen Elizabeth. 1 and 2. One gets the tobacco out of the States, the other one is actually put in power out of Kenya, which was brutalised by the British. But nobody likes to talk about that, and all of them who've kept quiet about it got a massive bung just a couple of years ago when I began to refocus on what happened in the Kenya massacres. The other guy that died just like Cooper in the film about Samson and Delilah was a man called Tyrone Power, very, very young. Yeah, the gods do not like their power base to be undermined by deviant people who are prepared to laugh at killings and genocides. All of them are prepared to do that. Yeah, until they realise that innocent and spirited people are onto them. Yeah, can you see it? The tip it up like the teacup joke. This is about the rabbits in the underworld, the Alice in Wonderland story, all of it, and all of the stories about the conversion from hunter-gathering in the forests to agrarian activities in Ethiopia, because there's no other fucking option now. Yeah, all of that is shared in the jokes about the agrarian nature of the world, and it takes you right back to Esau in the Bible. Right, and I could show you one other site to show you the relevance of how big the religious fraud is and who the members of the new cabals are. Let me show you that quickly. So turn them off, and then I'll show you just a quick set of images of one of the other colleges that I looked at, because St. Peter is probably the most criminal of the biblical jokes, because he's the first pope. Yeah, he's the one that denied Jesus 3 times when the French cock crows. Yeah, and all of it is really, really sick. And what you see when you open up at St. Peter's College, Oxford, is a grinning person that you'll already recognise. I want you to see the grin and who the person is before my batteries run out or they take me out. St. Peter's College. Yellow for the Rothschilds and green for the Allied and Axis powers. Yeah, and Ireland, in the sectarian and the Axis context, were fighting against the opposition, in inverted commas. Collegium Sancti Petri Libelli. Okay, established 1929, within 5 years of World War II. No, sorry, 1929, quite within 11 years. Oh yeah, that's better, that fits the template. 39 steps. My mathematics are not good, and that is actually arithmetic, and you can see that when I get angry that some of the facts on some of their specialist disciplines are actually quite inaccurate. I want to keep it simple, and I want to keep it to the genocide and the massive money stream that is the false religion and the elite universities. So there it is, the cross keys, yeah, the papal icons, the English red and white flag, and I'm not sure what those are. If that's doves, it's really cynical. 3 turrets, and you've got the little ramparts which are on the edge of every stamp, and that is something to do with the contract signing and the giving of the seal. Okay, but this is the photos I want you to see. Ken Loach, David Davis, former executive director of the FA. Hugh Fernley Whittingstall, a massive criminal in the interlocks with Lord Michael Grade of Great Yarmouth. Yeah, he's a TV chef, and he thinks he's ever so clever because he takes the piss out of mums who are now being stolen from to send their kids to English universities. He got that all for nothing. This bastard is a billionaire. He's the head of the British Central Bank now. Yeah, Canadian, doing okay. And this is a religious institution formed within 3 or 4 years of World War II, so it could become a profiteering religious institution in one of our great conflicts and one of their greatest triumphs. So the next one up is interesting. As a moralist, Lord Condon, former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Hugh Dancy, actor and model, Nick Houghton, current Chief of Joint Operations, British Armed Forces. That's them that have the bets on sinking the ships. Edward Akufo-Addo, former President of the Republic of Ghana, who used to have jungles and things. Yeah, but it's always the locals that get the blame. And they get the shopping trips with Tony Blair and these bastards in the pinstripes, but on the whiteboards. I can pin loads of crimes to him, yeah, and to Stevenson, one of his successors, and to the Lord Stevens of Kirkwhelpington. All of them have come out of office really quickly since I came back from New Zealand. There's a Yank in the team, Carl Albert, former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Right then, so Reverend Wilbur Vere Awdry, creator of Thomas the Tank Engine. Let's leave him alone, because that's the Beatles and the yellow submarine that gets us into all of the financial sector crimes all of the time. Yeah? Okay, right then, let's take you sadly into Ethiopia. Not Ethiopia, into the Sudan and to the confluence of the River Nile. I'll tell you about the exploration if we've got time later on. That is relatively unimportant as to the methods that compared to the methods that they used to take the world to war again and again and again and kill the innocents in their own countries. You've heard Greg Hallett talking about the cost of war, and if you host it on your territory, it is absolutely vicious for you. Right then, so let me just show you that one because it's interesting. The white and blue Nile merge at Khartoum, and some of the maps on that will give you some insight into the terrain around it now within the last 50 years. Okay, so there's the white Nile and the blue Nile, and they meet at Khartoum where these conflicts are that we're going to talk about. Every one of the surrounding places is a genocidal place. Yeah, that's the Italians brutalised Ethiopia, according to my mate Noam Chomsky, who has not yet replied to my plea to him to try and help expose the world's criminals this week. Eritrea, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, everywhere you go you have a genocide. Okay, and some of them are quite ancient, but Jonesy in the Dad's Army movies pretends that he's been at all of them and can make jokes about how prudent they are when they get the whole of the British forces to recede and surrender and leave the fighting to the indigenous people. It's really, really brutal, but all of the indigenous people are gone, and the sad bit is that every British troop that was there is also taken out, so none of them can chatter about it in the pub when they get home. Right then, and I want the Kiwis to know that this is not an accident, yeah, because we went there. It's a massive gorge, and when you get those fall lines, that's what happens. You get rocks shaken up, and right on the edge of our coast, it explains that when you go to a place called St. Abbs, the cliff that you see there, where it used to be connected to the Canadian mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and the rest of it went down to Australasia. When you offend the gods like Tommy Cooper did, everything that happens then is explicable, but no one sees it but me. But now they're obligated to pay attention, which is why Cameron's policy making before yesterday was much less greedy than his predecessors. I don't know whether or not he's still the PM. I'll find out this afternoon when I go for a walk. Okay, so let's go now to Khartoum and tell you the tragic tale. I know the gods care about the dam issues, but I want to show you how the politicians are so ruthless that they stop at nothing. Yep, but the polio that FDR got him in the end. I'm hoping that by informing them again about how this was done, that this time the interventions will occur before the sins do. Right then. So, the siege of Khartoum, General Gordon, GG, got it in the back, and there just happened to be a fine artist passing by. And the launch of the false news stories, you'll see that there is debate at the bottom. But in the Khartoum slaughter, the British newspapers were heavily involved in the battles, and this occurs 6,000 miles from home for the British armies in the siege, then the revenge attack by Kitchener within years of World War I. Yeah, just a few years. And the revenues that are released to the politicians that run it are massive. Part of the maddest war. Okay? So, the artist is anonymous, but these images showing this man being knifed in the back by a black man who has not in this case got a fez on, but it's clearly a black man who's behaving eccentrically compared to the religions that we run. Okay? And he's bravely posturing himself like Jesus Christ did as he gets the knife in the back. Jesus Christ got his in the ribs. And all of that is false news. And I don't know whether or not there ever was a General Gordon, but it made me think that when I went to the supermarket the other day, and I was working on this originally, that the school teachers from Gordon School who came forward in the fundraiser might have been there for motives that were less innocent than I thought. But they are terribly short of funds, and that is sad, really sad, yeah, that the government can no longer fund the school that they work in. Even although it's a primary school, they can no longer afford their tables and their computers. That is tragic, and it's just an extension of the methods and team tactics that were used here. A painting, yeah, so that is much less accurate than the news we get at the moment, but that much less bit there is in inverted commas. And the battle zone was a battle zone between 1884 in March and January 1885. Okay, so that is roughly 9 months. Okay, and what you've got is the strength. I did not realise that it was local militias and conscripts that were fighting here. I thought that these 7,000 people were actually from the UK, 6,000 miles from home. Yeah, and what you've got are cavalry and infantry, so they are people from armies that are experienced. Yeah, and they've got things that the locals on the other side, who do not defect to the power base and the colonial owners, they've got artillery. Yeah, and they've got 9 gunboats offshore, which are actually from the UK. Yeah, and they're able to bring the troops and the massive weaponry that the black man in that region has never even seen before. Yeah, and I watched this morning the jokes about the life of Brian and the explosive hand grenade that they use to try and kill the white rabbit in the tunnel. That's a joke about the vision at Lourdes, the white lady. Yeah, and all of it is ever so sick. Okay, so there are 50,000 people with spears against the modernised armies from overseas with gunboats and artillery. Who do you think's going to come off the worst? But sadly, in the Lord of the Rings film, the trees save the innocents, but they're unable to play that role since 1965. Yeah, that's 50 years ago. When I used to love the Discovery documentaries and all of the stories about Easter Island, and I did not then understand the religious joke at all. Okay, and we've got skiffs for this lot compared to 9 gunboats. Right, and what you get is an almost perfect result for the world leaders, because everybody ends up dead and they get to keep the money. So we've seen one picture of him getting killed, painted. Yeah, and there's the Mad Maddie. Oh, and there's the picture that I was hoping to find. Okay, so we've now heard Corporal Jones say that the Gatling guns were an invention of an American dentist. Can you see how the profiteering works? The munitions are made in other continents, they're traded with the politicians, and all of them are on the boards, the white boards of those companies, and all of the weaponry makes them a massive fortune. And all of the people that might reveal that when they came home and might challenge it because they were carrying the guns, are dispossessed of the guns before they get home, and all of them get shot down with the new technology that the profiteers make the profits from. Okay, so there's where we were. Let's take you to that map and show you what I'm telling you about the foliation. This is a Google map above the airspace around the Khartoum region, and you can see that there's the head of the Blue Nile is a place called Lake Tana, and there are very efficient looking air bases right next door to that place, and that is the source of the Blue Nile, or it was for a while. And so that's a lake, and you can the Blue Nile runs up through here to Khartoum, and the White Nile runs right down through the bottom here. Okay, and you've got here, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, a place called Gondar. Yeah, and I've shown you the place that is the Aswan Dam, that looks just like where the elves had their safety place, and they got a massive flood because the river there flooded, and it took out the evil people. Yeah, the people that die in these regions are the poor people all of the time. Okay, and there you can see that it looks as if there might be trees, but when you zoom in on Google Maps, there are none. It's just like a series of paddocks like we had in New Zealand. And what was happening in New Zealand when I left was the drainage system meant that all of the swamplands were being swallowed up, so that tractors could drive over them, massive tractors. And the other frauds were virtual product renewable energy windmill frauds, but they didn't have the capital because financial services stole it before they could get something floated in the stock market. Isn't that tragic? And a similar thing happened to the NHS in Dunedin where I worked, and it was a scandal at the time, and I understand that all of it is just a routine affair. Okay, and here we have Sana, Masrib, Taze, yeah, the head of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles Taze Russell. It's really, really funny. And the rib, and the Garden of Eden, where the BP plant is, and that's the Gulf. Okay, that's the Gulf. And up here you've got Gallipoli, which I talk about a lot, and all of them think it's really funny to laugh at the diarrhea, and they're looking for a boy for your field marshal. That's a sexual context that Corporal Jones was laughing at. Okay, yeah, and it is sick. Right then, what else can I show you? Let's go back to the story about the war, not to talk about the war. Okay, so this fine art picture, stabbing in the back, there is no artist accredited for that. That's quite unique on Wikipedia in my experience. And let's now just scroll down so I can give you some more facts. And they're openly declared, so we've told you about that bit already. Casualties and losses, entire force destroyed on this side. This is the powerful technological side with the gunpowder and the artillery. And the perfect result for the locals is that they get the blame for cutting the trees down, but all of the 50,000 of them are dead because these guys have got the superior weapons. And if you add that up, no one's the victor, but all of them are the dead. That's how it works. Charles George Gordon, GG, yeah, and that is the Governor General joke. He's in contention about whether or not he's a professional soldier. He's warring allegedly with the Prime Minister Gladstone about whether or not Britain should get involved, because they're just the owners of Egypt, and Egypt is the owners of the Sudan. Yeah, isn't it tragic that the Egyptian soldiers, the Turkish soldiers, and the local mercenaries who've deserted their country, and I forget what the name of that is, but I found it in the Zulu songs yesterday. There are mercenaries there, and it is very closely related to the scam about the people that deserted Vietnam. They're called the Hmong, and when you look for the Zulu music, you will see songs that are sung by groups that look just like the Hmong people's label, and that becomes the Home Alone joke. In Hollywood, 5 movies they made about Home Alone. So everybody's dead already in the first conflict, and that means that Britain now has to take revenge, because their Governor General got the knife in the back, but nobody's very sure whether or not that was the way he died. And there's a comment from his bodyguard later on. The Battle of Khartoum, Siege of Khartoum, Fall of Khartoum was the conquering, and how do we get... we've gotten... If I were to reduce the size of the screen, I would be able to see what we've written in the corners. Let's try that. Okay. Was the conquest of Egyptian held Khartoum. Are you getting it? It's totally twisted. By the mahdist forces led by Muhammad Ahmad. Egypt had held the city for some time prior to, but the siege that the Mahdists engineered and carried out from March 13th, 1884 to January 26, 1885 was enough to wrest control away from the Egyptian administration. I hope those guys are on my side. And they do not have an ejector seat. After a 10-month siege, when the Mahdists finally broke into the city, the entire garrison of Egyptian soldiers was killed, along with 4,000 Sudanese civilians. Same old story. 2 million in Iraq alone. Right then. Since the 1882 Anglo-Egyptian War, the British military presence had ensured that Egypt remained a de facto British protectorate. Isn't that ironic that you're protecting them, but all of them end up dead, including the non-combatants, and their armies are just in grass skirts with spears. They have no uniforms or medals or baldricks. Yeah, but they will have treasonous leaders. Everybody is happy to take the payment behind closed doors, and the joke here is that that is all obeyed. Sorry, I think there might be somebody at my door. Let me just check that out.
Hello there.
Hi.
Need a signature for that one, please.
Right. Yeah. If I refuse to open it,
It's from Patricia Tillman Company?
Yeah, I've asked for her advice on the telephone already.
Right.
What they're trying to do is to change the terms and conditions for the divorce already.
Alright.
They've done that 3 or 4 times already.
Well, I've actually got a... If you wanted, I can put not delivered and refused.
No, I'll take it.
Alright, I'll take it.
Yeah, I've got that little comment in that question on the tape, but I have to sign for it.
Yes, please. It's in the box. I thought you meant you didn't want it.
Yeah, well, they're messing me around.
Oh, well, I can imagine. So it'll be like that, isn't it?
Cheers, thanks for your help. Bye. So, the divorce case, they're trying to accelerate the closure on it now because they have no grounds and they are in a panic. and I politely asked her the other day how long I have to respond to her request that I just let my wife dip into the bank accounts already. Anyway, let's get back to the genocide. Okay, the Mahdi Muhammad Ahmad, he claimed to be the redeemer of the Islamic nation. The rebellion brought Sudan to the attention of the British government, and Prime Minister William Gladstone and War Secretary Lord Hartington did not wish to become involved in Sudan and persuaded the Egyptian government to evacuate all their garrisons in Sudan. General Charles Gordon, a popular figure in Great Britain and former Governor General of Sudan in 1876 to 79, was appointed to accomplish this task. Gordon's ideas on Sudan were radically different from Gladstone's. He believed that the Mahdi's rebellion had to be defeated, or he might gain control of the whole of Sudan and from there sweep all over Egypt. His fears were based on the Mahdi's claim to dominion. Why do you think Britain is in Egypt, so far from home, and running it? His fears were based on the Mahdi's claim to dominion over the entire Islamic world, and on the fragility of the Egyptian army, which had suffered several defeats at the hands of the very poorly armed Sudanese. Gordon favoured an aggressive policy in Sudan in agreement with noted imperialists such as Sir Samuel Baker, Sir Garnet Wolseley, and his opinions were published in the Times in January 1884. Gordon pledged himself to accomplish the Gordon pledged himself to accompany the evacuation of Sudan. He was given a credit of £100,000 and was promised by the British and Egyptian authorities all support and cooperation in their power. The tribesmen became worried by this news and their loyalty wavered. Okay, that's the conscripts that are going to fight in Khartoum for the people that own it indirectly through the Egyptian link, and the revolutionaries are their neighbours. Right then. A map of Khartoum during the siege. Gordon arrived at Khartoum on February the 18th, 1884. His first decisions were to reduce the injustices caused by the Egyptian colonial administration. Arbitrary imprisonments were cancelled, torture instruments were destroyed, and taxes were remitted. To enlist the support of the population, Gordon legalised slavery, despite the fact that he himself had abolished it a few years earlier. Yeah. This decision was popular in Khartoum, where the economy still rested on the slave trade. Are you getting the picture? That's the slave trade that takes Obama eventually into the presidency. And what happens now is when all the pop singers and all the celebrities like Angelina Jolie go offshore, they bring back orphan children because of the issues that we talk about God determining people's capacity to have children. Yeah, and what they do not want to happen is for bloodlines in the places that God planted those bloodlines to thrive. In other words, they want inbreeding and the total enslavement of the whole world's communities with no characteristics or dangerous features that might make their societies competent again. But that caused controversy in Britain. Professional soldier and diplomat, and the slavery issues, you can just see the greed. Yeah. Ka-ching. Muhammad Ahmad, the self-proclaimed Mahdi. All of the names are jokes for the Freemasons. Gordon was determined to smash up the Mahdi. He requested that a regiment of Turkish soldiers now, yeah, that's the Christendom place where the Turks are fighting in World War I against the British, with German advisors playing the roles that the Brits are playing in Khartoum. And that's only, at the end of this story, after the revenge attacks, is only 4 years after all of the bloodletting, all over Africa. Gordon asked for a unit of Indian Muslim troops and later for 200 British soldiers to strengthen the defences of Khartoum. Gordon began to resent the government's policy, and his telegrams to Cairo became, oh that's a bit ironic with the little bit that we've had with the postie there, became more acrimonious. On April the 8th he wrote, "I leave you with the indelible disgrace of abandoning the garrisons," and added that such a course would be the climax of the meanness. Okay, we now get on to the armoury and the involvement of the Allies in the profiteering sector. Okay, knowing that the Mahdists were closing in, Gordon finally ordered the strengthening of the fortifications around Khartoum. The city was protected to the north by the Blue Nile and to the west by the White Nile. To defend the riverbanks he created a flotilla of gunboats from 9 small paddle wheel steamers, until then used for communication purposes, like the postman who's ever so charming. In the southern part of the town, which faced the open desert, he prepared an elaborate system of trenches, makeshift fougas type landmines and wire entanglements. Yeah, I suspect that that is the Frenchies. Also, the surrounding country was controlled by the Shagia tribe, which was hostile to the Mahdi. So we've had the Nubiles dismembered by the creation of the dam on their region, so that the gods are less powerful, and down here we've got Ali G's mates. By early April 1884, the tribes north of Khartoum rose in support of the Mahdi and cut the Egyptian traffic on the Nile and the telegraph to Cairo. Okay, and the Cairo joke, the use of the Greek letters Chi, and I forget what it is, but it is a joke about the Pisos. Communications were not entirely cut, as runners could still get through, but the siege had begun and Khartoum could only rely on its own food stores, which could last 5 or 6 months. And that is a cynical comment about Sainsbury's and their capacity to deliver to our door here now. On March 16th, an abortive sortie led to the death of 200 Egyptian troops as the combined forces besieging Khartoum grew to over 30,000 men. Okay, and what we've got inside the garrison is starvation beginning to set in for both the garrison and the civilian population. Communication was kept through couriers, while Gordon also kept in contact with the Mahdi, who rejected his offers of peace and to lift the siege. The civilian population of Khartoum was about 34,000, so they're starving already. Yeah, and what you've got is 30,000 people on the other side, and it is a bloodbath. And here's another picture depicting accurately the death of General Gordon. This time the man's downstairs, and we get a fuller description of it, because it's actually owned by someone who's the artist. George W. Joy's portrayal of Gordon's death. Slightly different evidence. Gordon's plight exceeded great concern in the British press, and even Queen Victoria intervened on his behalf. That's the illegitimate Queen Victoria. By July 1884, Gladstone reluctantly agreed to send an expedition to Khartoum. The expedition was led by Sir Alf Garnett and Wolseley. Yeah, that's the Alf Garnett joke and the Cardinal Wolsey joke and the knighthoods joke for everybody who's prepared to be greedy and ruthless. With food supplies running low, many inhabitants of Khartoum dying of hunger, and the defenders' morale was at its lowest. And here you see the ships, like the ships appearing in the Lord of the Rings film, yeah, that are going to save the city of Gondor. It is ever so sick. On the night of January 25 to 26, an estimated 50,000 Mahdists attacked the city wall just before midnight, took advantage of the low level of the Nile, actually crossing it on foot, and rushed around the wall on the shores of the river and into the town. The details of the final assault are vague, but it's said
that by 3:30 AM the maddest man managed to concurrently outflank the city wall at the low end of the Nile, while another force led by al-Nujimi broke down the mausoleum, a gate. The mausoleum, a mausoleum is a place for the dead. Despite taking some casualties from mines and barbed wire obstacles. Yeah, so we've got the mines from the French, and we've got the barbed wire into this primitive country laid out by Gordon's men. Yeah, and the Britons are reluctant to fight or get involved in any way. The entire garrison, physically weakened by starvation, offered only patchy resistance and were slaughtered to the last man within a few hours, as were 4,000 of the town's innocent inhabitants, while many others were carried into slavery or rape and persecution. Accounts differ as to how Gordon was killed. Yet we've seen it. In another version, according to one version, when maddest warriors broke into the governor's palace, Gordon came out in full uniform, and after disdaining to fight, he was speared to death in defiance of the orders of the Mahdi, who had wanted him captured alive. In another version, Gordon was recognised by maddists while making for the Austrian consulate. The Jerrys are in it again and shot dead in the street. Yeah? Do you get it? What they've got are the diplomats from the European power brokers sitting in London, in Westminster, or in the posh consulate, and none of those are starving and shot dead in the street. Okay? So that's Gordon was shot dead in the street. One assumes that the Austrian consulate came out of the crisis okay and fully fed in a calorific context. The most detailed account of his death was given by his bodyguard, Khalil Aga Orfali, when he was debriefed by English officers in 1898 after the reconquest by Kitchener. According to Orfali, Gordon died fighting on the stairs leading from the first floor of the west wing of the palace. Yeah, the west wings, and the stories I told you about things going from east to west in the philosophical stories out of Cornell University yesterday. He got seriously wounded by a spear that hit him in the left shoulder. That's the ordinary working man's icon, where the cross was carried. He fought his way step by step, kicking from his path the wounded and dead dervishes. Isn't that brave of him? Yet you've seen the Wilson, Betty and Keppel depiction of the dervishes. These are the slaves if they have their way. He woke up several hours later. He found Gordon's decapitated body near to him. After Gordon's head was cut off, after he died, it was brought to Omdurman, where it was shown to Rudolf von Slatin, one of the Mahdi's prisoners. After it was shown to Slatin, the head was brought to the Mahdi. According to some sources, his body was dumped in the Nile. After the conquest, various attempts were made to locate Gordon's remains. You might notice it says in my footnotes, which are off to the side, that Slatin is Stalin, with a slight slip of the keyboard. Yeah, and the whole of the stories about Egypt, Christianity, and the Josephs in both of those stories, and all of the stories that they relaunch out of the Greek religions, the Greek myths, and all of the Greek stories about the media is in this story as well. But because it's over to the right, I might not be able to find it unless I scan down over to the right. Advance elements of the relief expedition arrived within sight of Khartoum 2 days later, as if they were like Superman. Yeah, after the fall of the city, the surviving British and Egyptian troops withdrew from Sudan, with the exception of the city of Sukin on the Red Sea coast and the Nile town wall of Wadi Halfa at the Egyptian border, leaving Muhammad Ahmad in control of the entire county. After his victory, Ahmad became the ruler of most parts of what is now Sudan, and he established a religious state the Madai. This is it. Do you see it? The media. It's the same with the Jason and the Argonauts as they make their way round the Med looking to steal the golden fleece from another country. They pick up a woman who's drowning in the ocean, and her name is Medea. And that becomes, in the streets of Finchley, the "my dear" for the Jewish people joke. And that's the media. Okay? In the Pick the Pockets or 2 film, "my dear" is used all of the time, and my mother-in-law uses it in Hemel Hempstead, where Born Leisure are registered, and all of that is a cover-up for the head of the inquest at Nuremberg. His name is Harris, like Rolf. Yeah, which was governed by harsh enforcement of Sharia law. So the media is a joke about law enforcement being anything other than a joke and being the tool for total world ownership. He died shortly afterwards, possibly from typhoid. Yeah, I've told you about the polio thing for FDR. They get what they deserve in the end. Though the state he founded survived him, following a string of mostly disastrous battles in the year to come, as well as complex international events that would compel the further colonial interests throughout Africa, the Anglo-Egyptian forces would steadily regain their control over Sudan. 14 years after the great conquest of Khartoum, the Battle of Diwa Karet. Now this is a joke for them. Let me just find it. So that is... well, my footnotes have been taken off. Don't know how they did that. I've got no idea how they did that. They've not been able to do that before. But what you've got there is, if we just dissect it, the Battle of Di is the Dionysius, and that's the gods' carrots, yeah, and the gods are portrayed as the donkeys. Christ is portrayed as the donkeys, and the carrot is the joke about the donkeys and their foodstuffs. Okay? At the Battle of Dawi Karet, the Sudanese Mahdist rebellion was finally extinguished, and the Mahdist war was over, and everybody lives happily ever after. But you should see how much money is released from the Parliament. In the immediate aftermath of the Mahdist victory, the joy in the Mahdist camp was contrasted by consternation in Great Britain and Egypt. The British press put the blame of Gordon's death on Gladstone, who was charged with excessive slowness in sending relief to Khartoum. He was rebuked by Queen Victoria in a telegram which became known to the public. His government fell in June 1885, though he was back in office the next year. The public outcry, yeah, so can you see that? That's like Winston Churchill, but much shorter. When Winston Churchill failed at Gallipoli, because he triumphed at Gallipoli by killing 150,000 Anzacs in a fortnight, they tried to take him out of the War Office, but he was back as Prime Minister by World War II. Same deal for Gordon, and his opponent in London, Gladstone, totally condones it after only a year. The public outcry soon weakened, first when press coverage and sensationalism of the events began to diminish, and secondly when the government released details of the £11.5 million military budget costs for pursuing war in the Sudan. Remember that we have not yet talked about British troops in the Sudan. We got the weaponry, yeah, and that is 120 years ago. 11.5 million. Gordon got 100,000, as we've already heard. In reality, Gladstone had always viewed the Egyptian-Sudanese imbroglio with distaste and felt some sympathy for the Sudanese striving to throw off the Egyptian colonial rule, and also his money stream for the slavery issues. Does not say that there. In Britain, Gordon came to be seen as a martyr and a hero. In 1896, an expedition led by Horatio again, the Nelson name, Herbert Kitchener, was sent to avenge his death, who swore to do so upon hearing of Gordon's demise, and reconquer Sudan. On 2nd September 1898, Kitchener's troops defeated the bulk of the Mahdist army at the Battle of Omdurman. 2 days later, a memorial service for Gordon was held in front of the ruins of the palace where he had died. Surviving family members of the movement's leaders were held by the British in a prison in Egypt. The women and children were held there for 10 years. The men were held for 12 years. After the return to Sudan, they were held under house arrest for the rest of their lives. See President Mubarak today and sectarian warlords being released here, in this case in the Sudan, 4 years before World War I. Isn't that timely? These events are depicted in a 1996 film called Khartoum, with Charlton Heston as General Gordon, and I find this quite incredible because this is the Mad Mahdi, but Laurence Olivier, the sophisticated romantic Shakespearean actor, is picked as Muhammad Ahmad, the Mad Mahdi. Time cannot erase the crimes and the magnitude of these sins. Okay, I think that's the end of that bit. Let me take you back up to Aswan and show you some of the stories about the Nile, and the links to the Pizos are massive, but because they've taken some of my footnotes out, I'm very nervous. Oh no, we still got some of them. So the Aswan Dam is built somewhere in this region, right at the top of the cataracts. It's massive, and what happens there is that you're able then to irrigate the land downstream of that, and you're able, in theory, to prevent the floods, both in New Zealand and in America and in Egypt. They have massive floods as they're trying to construct these massive Babylonian dams. Okay, and the High Dam became a key objective of the Egyptian government following the Egyptian Revolution of 1952. So we're getting close now to the brutalisation of the Yemen by the Brits to protect their BP plant. Time switch long before Wilson, Betty and Keppel. The High Dam was constructed between 1960 and 1970. The Deuteronomy chapter gives the 7. Okay, so in the Bible, the floods are a very important part of the story, and it's about times of famine and times of prosperity, and that is covered in Deuteronomy, which is the joke about the stoning in the Monty Python's Life of Brian film. And the joke about Deuteronomy is that we should only worship the God in the skies, and that is the only thing. That's command number 1 in the test, in the 10 rules that we got. Okay, and all of that is totally ignored by all of the messianic presences, even in those Indian nations that were conscripted into this conflict. Okay, British hydrologist Edward Edwin Hurst, to store water in Sudan and Ethiopia where evaporation is much lower, was favoured. Instead, the Nile Valley plan by British hydrologists to store water in Sudan and Ethiopia where evaporation is much lower was favoured. I think this is about the marshlands which they have at the top of the Blue and the White Nile. They used to have when the trees were around. The overthrow of the monarchy led to the free officers movement, including the launch of the Egyptian Nasser, who was the head of the revolutionary forces, and became the president who got assassinated in the end, I think. Egyptian President Nasser and the Soviet leader Khrushchev at the ceremony to divert the Nile during the construction of the Aswan Dam on May 14, 1964. At this occasion, Khrushchev called it the 8th wonder of the world, and you've got links to John Foster Dulles, who was the senator who was in charge